Hello, my friends. Once again, welcome to the Bradley J. Show. We are with Rich Rubino, who's a political historian primarily, but I make him kind of give commentary too, because he's eminently qualified, really, to do so. How you doing, Rich?
I'm doing well, Bradley. How are you?
Very well. So we have a rare thing going on
We do.
in the House of Representatives, where they're unable to come up with a speaker. That happens rarely, like 1854 and 1923 or
Yep.
29 or something like that.
23, yeah.
23. So I want to look at the history of that and then try to figure out what this might mean. Why is this important? It might signify problems for governance by the House with the Republican majority, with this particular Republican majority. Some say that it might signal an inability, even a lack of desire to really govern, because that they came to power simply by being negative and trying to push out the Democrats without a plan of their own and without the chops, without the skills to actually govern. But we'll talk about that later. What about the history?
Yep. Well, so this has happened before. The biggest one was 1855, right before the Civil War. There were 21 candidates. Eventually, they made an agreement, and part of the agreement they made is you only needed a plurality to choose who the speaker was going to be, not an outright majority, just to get this over with after 3 long, arduous months. They landed up actually this entire time choosing Nathaniel Banks, who was actually from Massachusetts, a Massachusetts native. And interestingly, he was a member of the Know Nothing Party. The Know Nothing Party, why do you call them a Know Nothing? Because they would come out of a meeting and the press would come, they say, "What did you talk about that meeting?" And they would just say, essentially, "We know nothing." Basically, they were an anti-immigrant party. They are also a very much anti-slavery party. This was the time, by the way, when there was the Democratic Party, the Conservative Party, the Republican Party was up and coming. There was the Free Soil Party, which is very much abolitionist, anti-slavery. So he basically formed a coalition of all these kind of disparate political parties, and he served basically for one term, and then he became relatively uneventful. Then he became governor of Massachusetts. The most recent one, though, was in 1923, and this is another Massachusetts person. This is Frederick Gillette, and Gillette was one of the more conservative members. It's very much contrary-wise of what's going on today. At the time, there were two bloodlines in the Republican Party, a liberal or moderate bloodline that was very formidable, and the conservatives. And the more liberal bloodline basically wanted concessions to be made in order for more liberal proposals to come to the floor. And essentially, Frederick Gillette basically caved after about 9 votes and agreed in order to get about 9 votes, and then eventually he became speaker, but only for one term. And eventually, it was kind of interesting. He landed up running for a Senate seat. Very rarely. Imagine today if Kevin McCarthy decided to retire from the House and run for a Senate seat. But back then, that was actually quite prevalent. That you would, even if you're Speaker of the House, you would go when you would run for a Senate seat. And by the way, at that time, when Calvin Coolidge was president, Henry Cabot Lodge Sr. was Majority Leader, and Frederick Gillette was the Speaker of the House. All three were from Massachusetts, so you had kind of the Massachusetts trifecta. But Gillette was very much he was very uncharismatic, if you will. One of the press said that you should never give him coffee for fear that he'd stay awake all day, because that was what he was basically known as. He was very much and at the time, sometimes people that become speakers of the House are not the most charismatic figures. Witness Denny Hastert, Tom Foley, John McCormick, Sam Rayburn. Even lots of times people will become speaker because they've only essentially been elected by one small constituency out of what today is 435 voting members. So they've never actually had to go and run at a national level. So in very many times they're kind of local politicians who have kind of made good by making backroom deals sometimes with other members or gaining trust of other members, but sometimes they're not very charismatic. I think that Kevin McCarthy and Nancy Pelosi are probably a little bit more charismatic than some of their predecessors. But that was the last time that happened, that you had a contentious race. As a matter of fact, from 1945 through 1994, every single Republican voted for every Republican speaker candidate, and every Democrat voted for every Democrat candidate. Now, since then, you've had a few exceptions. For example, Gene Taylor, a conservative Democrat from Mississippi, used to vote for Jack Murtha, a congressman from Pennsylvania, in part so he could go back to his constituents in Biloxi, Mississippi, and say, I did not vote for Dick Gephardt. I did not vote for Nancy Pelosi. Jim Cooper, Congressman Cooper from Tennessee, would vote for Colin Powell. You say, why Colin Powell? Because the Constitution does not stipulate that a member that you have to vote for an actual member, and the chair and the Speaker of the House does not have to be a sitting member of the body. So obviously Colin Powell is not in Congress, but there have been some proposals even that Fred Upton, who just retired from Congress, a moderate Republican from Michigan, Bill Cohen, for example, and former senator from Maine and former U.S. Defense Secretary, has recommended, why don't we put Congressman Upton in there, so you don't have to actually be a speaker, be a member of Congress, and that has been floated.
So this happens so rarely that it must be important to have a speaker right away. What does it mean? How does it clog things up to not have a speaker? Is it important?
Yes,
or
it
is
is.
this just a blip? Their term lasts months. Why is it important to get one in the first day, second day, third day?
Yeah. First of all, it's not just a ceremonial role. But most people, I think, when they think of a speaker, think of somebody standing up in the gavel, recognizing the general from Arkansas has the floor. They actually rarely do that. They'll get up there at the beginning of the day, and then they'll usually leave. And then what's called a speaker pro tem or a president pro tem of the House will essentially go up there and will preside over the House of Representatives. So they're never actually there. In some states, the speaker actually does preside over the United States House of Representatives. They can do that, but it's usually a freshman or a sophomore member of the majority party that's doing that. They're usually in meetings. They're doing other things. They're trying to whip for the majority party. But one thing they do is they set the rules and they're voted on. They also appoint steering committees. The steering committees decide who's going to be on the respective committees. But you need a speaker to actually appoint who's going to be on the committee, specifically with the majority party. And that's the very first vote that you have, is who the Speaker of the House is going to be. And frankly, they're third in line to be president. So it's an interesting scenario right now. There's no speaker. So Joe Biden is first in line to be president. Kamala Harris is president. Kamala Harris is second. And then who's third? Patty Murray. Now, how many people know who Patty Murray is? Well, she's a senator from Washington State. She's the Senate pro tempore. She's actually the first female. And that's usually mostly a ceremonial role, but it could be everything if the president, the vice president were to die or become incapacitated, because that person would succeed to the presidency. And it's usually the senior member of the majority party. So Dianne Feinstein, who's 89 years old, was offered the position. She did not take it. So Patty Murray, who was first elected in 1992, is now currently third in line to be presidency. And by the way, there have been a lot of other members that have been Senate pro tem who are. Strom Thurmond was 98, 99 years old, and he was third in line to be president. Bob Byrd was in his late 80s, early 90s. He was third in line to be president. So it's usually somebody who's been there for quite a long time.
So by the way, I'm surprised that the president and the vice president would ever be in the same place at the same time. Because
it happens.
I don't think that it should. Shouldn't
it does when certainly, obviously in the White House they have weekly lunches.
Yeah.
They sometimes still got the national security briefing together, but also when the president is delivering either an address to Congress or the State of the Union address. I say it's address to Congress. It's usually the first address they give is not called a State of the Union address. When they give that, or they give the respective State of the Union address, the Senate president, in his position as the head of the Senate, he's actually the vice president. Him or her is actually paid by the legislative, not the executive body, is standing right behind the president, and the cabinet members are there as well. So you say, what happens if there was essentially some sort of a terrorist attack? What they do is there's a designated survivor, this one cabinet member that's put in an undisclosed location, and that person would essentially take over the reins of the executive branch if there were to be such a tragedy.
Wow. We do have a kind of a side question. Bob Heidelberg says, my question is, how do so many politicians become so rich even though they only get paid a base salary to serve the voters? Well, okay. How does that happen?
That's obviously there are plenty of examples of that. In some cases, I'll say what the kind of honest way, I guess you could say honest or dishonest graph. One of the honest ways would be they could write a book.
Yeah.
And Barack Obama, for example, did that. He wrote a book. He wrote a book when he was in the United States Senate, made millions of dollars off of that, obviously. But I don't think that's what you're actually getting at. I think what the gentleman's probably getting at is there some sort of graft? Is there some sort of corruption? Or there's some sort of backroom deals? And the answer is it's probably more nuanced, and there probably are. Very few actually get caught. Sometimes they do get caught. William Jefferson from Louisiana, for example, was caught with certain bribe money that they literally caught in his refrigerator, in his freezer rather, and he ended up going to jail for 7 years. Randy Duke Cunningham from California was somebody who took many bribes, and he ended up going to jail. But certainly there are some. Interestingly, Joe Biden was arguably the poorest United States senator when he was in there. Even if you go into the 2001, he was someone who had very little money. But then after he became vice president, he wrote a book, and he made millions of dollars on that. So that's probably the easiest way to do it. It used to be that sometimes, interestingly, the senators would go out and they would give speeches, kind of, and get a per diem amount of money. I'm thinking of Lowell Weicker, for example, of Connecticut. And Lowell Weicker would go out and give speeches nationally. He was a liberal Republican. And when he ran against Joe Lieberman for the United States Senate seat, Joe Lieberman made this a big issue against Lowell Weicker, basically saying Lowell Weicker is not doing the work, and the people of Connecticut. He's missing votes. He's going out and he's going around the country and he's doing these speeches. Joe Lieberman won that race. Fast forward to 2003, 2004, when Joe Lieberman's running for president. He's not making speeches, but Joe Lieberman is certainly missing many votes during his presidential run. So it all comes kind of full circle, if you will.
All right, so let's take a look at what's going on now.
Yes.
You have these folks with an inability to choose a speaker. And as I mentioned in the beginning, there are many that say, look, this is evidence that this crop of representatives don't have the ability, the chops, the experience, maybe even the desire to lead. And that basically they campaigned on negativity, bringing in fear, without a plan and without the ability to work together to govern. And they got into power, and that's what you're seeing now. And perhaps that it's and I know you don't like doing commentary, but just as you observe, perhaps this is the result of the kind of Trumpism type of candidates that get in with support from the president, but not the skills. Is that possible, what we're saying? And how might this affect? Things are so tight there. How might this affect the ability of the Republicans to get anything done?
Yeah, well, so this is essentially 20 members of a 222-member caucus, 19 of whom are members of the Freedom Caucus. So who are the Freedom Caucus? They sprung up essentially after the Tea Party wave. In 2010, a litany of candidates, mostly populist, a lot of them were non-politicians or who had very diminutive political experience, ran for office and won. Most of them come from very safe districts, meaning, in other words, the only way they're going to lose is in a primary, because whoever wins the primary is tantamount to winning the entire election, because there just aren't enough Democrats to make the Democrat a formidable candidate. So most of them were elected as conservatives, and they were essentially their agenda their agenda was essentially to institute conservative policies, and their mandate is to make government atrophy as much as possible. They want to weaken, they want to enervate, they want to diminish, if you will, the powers of the federal government. So they get elected, and this is essentially what they're doing. They actually do have a plan. Their plan, at least, is to get concessions from the establishment Republican Party. So who are the establishment Republican Party? Basically, the people that have been elected, they know how to win races. Some of them come from actual swing districts or more moderate districts, like Dan Beacon of Nebraska or Scott Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania. But they come from districts where you actually have to go to your constituents and say, I did this, I did that. And if you see I brought this road, I brought this bridge, I brought this dam to the district, it actually helps. For these conservatives, though, for these Freedom Caucus members, they need to go to their constituents and say, I did everything I possibly could to diminish the size of government. Okay? So by diminishing the size of government, they're actually winning with their own constituents. And a lot of these people come from districts that were 20, 25 points for Trump. One of them, Oklahoma, 2nd District, 50 points, 53 points for Donald Trump last time. Scott Perry, the head of the Freedom Caucus, actually is one of the only ones that represents somewhat of a swing district, and it's actually becoming a little bit more Democrat right around Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. But they actually do have an agenda. It looks like they've gotten concessions from Kevin McCarthy. Part of the agenda is they want there to be a vote on term limits. Okay, well, Newt Gingrich wanted the same thing in 1994. They got the vote on term limits, and then it essentially failed in the United States Senate. But that's one thing they want. They want a motion to vacate the chair, which Kevin McCarthy has agreed to, by only one member, meaning that essentially if one member gets up there and says, I want to have a vote right now on having a new speaker, and whether this, it's almost like a no confidence vote of the speaker of the Speaker of the House, like they have in Great Britain, like they have in a lot of parliamentary systems. So that's something he's agreed to. He's essentially agreed to. But basically what they really want to do is they want to limit the size of government, and they believe that Kevin McCarthy is a go along to get along type of Republican, someone who wants to bring spoils for their districts, who will support earmarks, but essentially will work with will work with Democrats. And we've all had this through time immemorial. Democrats and Republicans excoriate each other publicly, but then privately they work together and they make sorts of deals. They say Kevin McCarthy voted for Obama's spending plans. He voted for all these big spending packages in the Bush administration, his first 2 years there. They say, we want to put a screeching halt to that. And the other thing Kevin McCarthy has agreed to do is he's agreed that his super PAC, essentially his super PAC will not play favorites in primaries in districts that are not safe. I mean, in safe districts, rather. So in other words, if there's a district that's 20 points for a Republican, he's not going to nominate somebody who's more establishment oriented. They're going to stay neutral in that race. That's something he's agreed to. It's interesting. Every member of the party is given essentially an assessment, meaning there's a certain amount of money you're supposed to raise. Did you know that you're supposed to raise for your party, whether you're most conservative member, moderate member, liberal member? And he's raised like $30 million respectively for Republican candidates, more than any other member. That's why that's why the vast preponderance of them feel indebted to Kevin McCarthy because of all the money he's raised. He's been in there since 2007 rather. And as soon as he got in there, he's been raising money. He's been essentially running for Speaker of the House. But a lot of these members, like Matt Gaetz from Florida, for example, he doesn't have to worry about money from the party because he's getting money from all these individuals, a lot of these are from outside of his district, who are ideologues, if you will, ideologically minded, who like somebody who's going to go after the Republican Party nationally. Lori Boebert the same way. So they're not indebted one way, or they're not indebted at all to Kevin McCarthy. If anything, when Matt Gaetz goes back to his constituents in northern Florida on the Panhandle and says, "I took on Kevin McCarthy," he's going to get a rousing ovation.
So it's it seems like they're. Let me back up. Nancy Pelosi was powerful and got stuff done. They want to take power away from the speaker. They want to decentralize the power in the House. But the way you get stuff done is to kind of have a leader that does have some power. They really want to get nothing done. They want to get less done.
Yeah, they want to get, this is, by the way, they want less power, certainly in the speaker, and they want more power in the rank and file members, specifically in the conservative members of the House of Representatives. They want the speaker to agree, for example, to put certain conservatives, certain Freedom Caucus members on the omnipotent Ways and Means Committee, arguably the most powerful committee in the House of Representatives. But they really want the power to come through the members, including freshman members, including members that are insurrectionists, that are insurgents. They don't want the power all in the speaker. Interestingly, Joe Cannon, arguably the most powerful speaker in American history, he was also chairman of the Rules Committee and Speaker of the House. At the time, the Democrats, working with the moderate Republicans, tried to enervate or weaken his power, and eventually they did that, and they actually put a lot of the power back with the members. But that's essentially what the conservatives want. They think Kevin McCarthy is an establishment politician. They think he's essentially going to be making deals with the Biden administration, and they want more power in the rank and file members.
So making deals is really what governance has been about for the longest time. About compromise. They don't want to compromise. That's one of the key elements of the success of the United States is compromise. They don't want to do that. It seems like power comes from unity in their party, would come from unity in their party in the House. And they want to diminish unity. And by doing that, aren't they going to diminish their ability to legislate in a direction they want.
Well, I think they think that they think actually if they go back to their constituents, any governance that they can actually stop, if they want to stop budget bills, if they want to stop going over the debt limit, if they don't do it, if they go back to their constituents are going to say that's great, you're working toward a balanced budget. So essentially, it's almost like William F. Buckley used to say a conservative is somebody who looks at all the progress and says stop. That's essentially what they're looking to do. They're saying our idea of progress is to give more power in the rank and file members and to stop the kind of deals between Kevin McCarthy and Joe Biden, because they think Kevin McCarthy is going to propitiate or cave, if you will, to Joe Biden, to the Democrats, to Hakeem Jeffries. So I think they would say, yeah, we didn't get elected because we say we're going to benefit this industry in our district, this industry in our district. Lots of times they ran against the Republicans who did that. In Colorado, Lori Bobart, she won against Scott Tippin, who was somewhat of a conservative establishment Republican, who basically would go and he'd say, I brought these dams, I've done all this for the district, I brought jobs here. That's not what she's here to do. She's here to limit the size of government and really be recalcitrant, be a rebel. Denver Riegelman was actually a member of the Freedom Caucus. He ran for re-election. He lost to Bob Good. Bob Good ran to his right because he was basically said that Denver Riegelman was somebody who would be too much of a compromiser, or someone who would work with Democrats. So I think that's basically true. I think they would rather essentially stop the wheels of government than try to get the wheels of government going by making compromises in the center of American politics, that vital center.
Well, won't that hurt them? Like when their district doesn't get the jobs and doesn't get the stuff that the old school representatives used to do? Won't that be damaging to them?
Not so much, not because of the constituency that they're going for. And their districts are so conservative that essentially when you're running and sometimes you're running against an establishment Republican is going to say, I'm a conservative as the next guy, but look what I brought here, look what I brought there, look what I brought there. They're running the opposite. They're saying, I'm running to limit the size of government. Some are saying, I won't even take earmarks.
It would seem like they would want to work together for, say, a sensible immigration policy. But no, they just want no immigration policy. They're not going to be able to legislate anything, but that's their goal, kind of. We want the wheels to stop working, and that's the idea. They don't want the wheels to work towards compromise and sensible answers. They just want to stop everything.
Well, there are things that they do have specific proposals that they want. Term limits is one of them.
Term limits for which office?
Term limits for members of the House and the Senate.
I see.
Another one is they all seem to be unified on having a balanced budget amendment to the United States Constitution. This is something that back in 1995, part of Newt Gingrich's contract with America, actually passed the House of Representatives. It went to the Senate. Now you need essentially 67 votes out of 100 to get it to go to the states. Every solitary Republican voted for it except for Mark Hatfield of Oregon. And Mark Hatfield of Oregon was the difference maker in it not essentially passing. Some wanted Bob Dole, who was the majority leader at the time, to try to punish Mark Hatfield. He would not do that. That hurt him a little bit in his presidential run, but that was the last time that there was really a full bore effort to get a balanced budget amendment. But that is something that I think they do. That I think they certainly do want. Others want. I mean, they're unified on, for example, wanting Trump's border wall. That's another thing that they're pretty much unified on. So there are certain things in terms of governance that I think they do have agenda. Right. If you ask Scott Perry what are his agenda items, he'll give you certain issues.
Any idea how seeing what's going on might affect a future election? Is it work against the Republicans to see this go on?
Yes, I think it absolutely will. I think from a presidential level, it's very easy for a Democratic nominee to say the Republicans can't even govern their own party. How can they govern the nation? And when in a general election, you're not only going for the base, you want to consolidate the base, and the Democrats have done that. They've consolidated the base. All 212 members from Jared Golden to AOC are voting for their leadership team. Okay, there's not a single dissenter. They're going to say, we have a unified party. And Joe Biden, for example, if he runs for re-election, other than Marianne Williamson and some nominal opposition, the party is pretty much going to be unified. Even Ro Khanna, who potentially a liberal congressman from New York, a Bernie Sanders acolyte, has said he will support Joe Biden. Members of the Freedom Caucus have said they're going to support. The Progressive Caucus, which is the more liberal caucus in the Democratic Party, said they're going to support Joe Biden. So they'll say essentially, we're unified. We're going to consolidate toward Joe Biden. While Joe Biden might not necessarily be our base candidate or our favorite candidate, we're consolidated because we support his agenda items, so we did not want a Republican in office. They say, look at the Republican Party. This is what the Democratic nominee is going to say. They're essentially being held hostage by a very small group of neo-anarchists or something to that effect. And they're giving the talking points right now to the Democratic Party, and then the Republican nominee is going to be kind of between a rock and a hard place. They're going to be a very delicate balancing act. On the one hand, they don't want to be seen as being captive to the more conservative elements. On the other hand, they want the conservative elements to stick with them because they don't want them to support either a third party or to say, essentially, we're just not going to come out and vote.
Yeah, that's not going to make a conservative vote left, but it might make them stay home, right?
Or theoretically, or they could go to the Libertarian nominee.
Right.
I mean, I'm saying from a theoretical basis, but they want those conservatives to support them, and they want those conservatives to support them silently because they're unpopular in the rest of the country. But you also do not want them to come out and excoriate you, because if they come out and excoriate you, respectively, then you are then you know that a lot of these people in the base, particularly a lot of the benefactors who are giving money, who have given money to members of the Freedom Caucus, might say, oh, he's just another Gerald Ford, moderate Republican. We're not going to support him. I'm going to put my money in. I'm going to put my money on members of the House of Representatives. Maybe I'll give them to Freedom Caucus members running for re-election, and then as opposed to my presidential nominee.
Okay. So what do you make of Trump's endorsement's failure to work for Kevin McCarthy?
Yeah, this is interesting. So Kevin McCarthy was, of course, establishment Republican, someone who was very critical of Donald Trump when he ran. He used to say that Donald Trump and Dana Rohrabacher, who was someone who's kind of a Russophile, I guess you could call it, somebody who was very much supported of Vladimir Putin's policies, very anti-NATO expansion. He used to say that those are the two people that Putin essentially has captive right now. So Donald Trump wins, and Kevin McCarthy does everything he can to try to genuflect, to propitiate him.
Yeah, he went down to Mar-a-Lago. He was like the first guy down to Mar-a-Lago to kiss butt.
Oh, but I'm going back now to when he first got elected, to 2017, okay. And they didn't really know each other well. So they worked together. Kevin McCarthy was the majority leader. Of course, Paul Ryan was the speaker, and Donald Trump would work with Kevin McCarthy. Then in 2020, and actually after the day of the insurrection, exactly 2 years ago for this day, this feria, exactly 2 years ago, Kevin McCarthy condemned Donald Trump. First of all, he called Donald Trump and he said, you have to call these people off. And Donald Trump supposedly said, well, Kevin, I bet that I guess you support. I guess these people support me more than you do.
Right.
McCarthy goes to the floor, condemns him. Then I think at the time he figured that Donald Trump's popularity amongst the base of the Conservative Party would dissipate. It did not. Couple weeks later, he goes to Mar-a-Lago and essentially kind of, I guess you could say, genuflects to Donald Trump, kisses his ring or whatnot, and they both work together to try to bring the Republicans into the majority party for 2022. In 2022, Kevin McCarthy has a primary challenger in his district in Bakersfield, California. Donald Trump comes out, and it's a kind of a Tea Party conservative type. And Donald Trump comes out and endorses Kevin McCarthy and said he's the best candidate for the Central Valley of California. Then he supports Kevin McCarthy for speaker against the more conservative elements who want somebody else. Now you have people like Lori Bobart, for example, who are now and Matt Gaetz, who are very much tribunes of the Trump message. They sang from that hymn book. They sang from that song sheet, if you will. Now they are essentially saying, we think Donald Trump is a great president, but we really disagree with him on this. So someone's like, he's kind of like, he's in the case of some of these members who came here on the Trump wave. Now they are essentially more conservative than Donald Trump. It's an interesting.
They're not afraid of Donald Trump anymore because they perceive his power to have waned enough. So it's more advantageous for them to step away.
They're also. They also, I think, see Kevin, and then this would be the same in the Senate for some members in terms of Mitch McConnell. they see him as somebody who is kind of persona non grata in the base of the party. Ideologues, there's always ideologues, and then they're kind of pragmatists. Pragmatists are people like Kevin McCarthy who run as conservatives, but then when they get elected, they sit down with the Democrats. The people on the right are those who are essentially saying, no, we got elected. We have very conservative constituencies here, almost to a person. They're very conservative constituencies. And I say, we're elected essentially to make government atrophy. We're not here to kind of work across the aisle. We're not here for bipartisanship. The only bipartisanship we're going to be working with is essentially the right and the left, where they kind of connect on issues like, for example, Scott Perry is somebody who was who is at least somewhat supportive, for example, of gay marriage. Some members, Matt Gaetz is supportive of the legalization of marijuana and has actually worked on legislation for the legalization of marijuana in the military, for example. So in some cases, they can actually work on the right and the left, but generally speaking, in terms of economic issues, their view is, no, we're not working with Kevin McCarthy. We're certainly not working with the Democratic hierarchy.
And finally, what does it mean that Trump got only the one vote?
Well, that was
nomination and the one vote to be speaker.
Yeah, and that's because, again, the Constitution does not explicitly say that a member that the Speaker of the House has to be an actual member. So Matt Gaetz voted for Donald Trump, and he actually went to Donald Trump about a year ago and said, what do you think of this idea? What do you think of we actually making you Speaker of the House? And Donald Trump supposedly said, I love it. And he actually went to a rally and he said, this would be great. You have Joe Biden delivering a State of the Union address. Kamala Harris, as president of the Senate, is sitting behind him. And then there is Donald Trump sitting behind Joe Biden as well, I guess making faces or whatnot. But I don't think that was really ever an actual plan to get somebody who's not a member of the House. So I don't think he feels offended by it necessarily. I think his basic view is Kevin McCarthy is kind of the best scenario we have. He says Kevin McCarthy is not perfect. Kevin McCarthy has challenged me in the past, but we need somebody as a speaker, who's somebody who can raise money. We need somebody who is actually going to try to get the conservative agenda done. So what we've made compromises, and he's basically saying we want Kevin McCarthy in there.
So it's Kevin McCarthy's given away so much. He's desperate to become speaker. Is that just a lifelong dream? How does it benefit him other than ego?
Yeah. So this is somebody who was, he was involved with young Republicans, comes from a Democratic family, but he was involved with the young Republicans, someone who's been pretty much congenital conservative, or at least establishment conservative. He worked for actually Bill Thomas from 1987 to 2005. Who's Bill Thomas? Bill Thomas was an omnipotent member he was the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee and was his successor in his Bakersfield congressional district. And so he knows all about power, and he learned it from the best. He learned it from Bill Thomas. So when Thomas retired, Kevin McCarthy ran for his seat. As soon as he gets in, himself, Paul Ryan, who was Paul Ryan from Wisconsin, and Eric Cantor from Virginia become the young guns. They're supposed to be the new conservative movement, if you will, the conservative intelligentsia with all these new ideas for the Republican Party. And they were also seen as somewhat insurgents. Now look what happened to them. Eric Cantor in 2014, he was majority leader of the United States House of Representatives, online to succeed John Boehner as Speaker of the House. He lost his own re-election bid in a Republican primary for being too liberal on the issue of immigration to David Brat in Virginia. Paul Ryan landed up after becoming Mitt Romney's vice presidential nominee in 2012. He became Speaker of the House. He landed up essentially resigning probably too early. And now Kevin McCarthy's the only one left. And now he, who was once the anti-establishment Republican, or was at least somebody who was kind of on the conservative periphery of the party, is now seen as too moderate, too much of a establishment type of Republican. But he's somebody who's always wanted this. He's been raising money. He gets to know every Republican member. He says, what can I do? What can I do? Do you want me to come to your district? Do you want me to give money? I got a super PAC. What can I give you? That's why I'm not a conservative member. Say, yeah, this guy's done a lot for us. And he has. He's done a lot. He's raised $30 million for the Republican Party. He wants to be Speaker of the House. He wanted to be Speaker of the House after John Boehner resigned, in part because Mark Meadows from North Carolina kept bringing up this motion to vacate the chair, meaning essentially back then only one member could say, I move that we hold a vote of no confidence on the Speaker. He was about to become Speaker. Then he goes on Fox News and he suggested that the Benghazi investigation about Hillary Clinton was essentially just partisan, and they were just trying to go after Hillary Clinton. So then they essentially say, we don't want you to become speaker. So then he has to wait it out. Paul Ryan becomes speaker. He's majority leader. This is his time. This is his dream. This is what he wants to do. And obviously, he first of all, he does not want to embarrass himself. And if he were to say, oh, let's leave Scalise do it, let someone else do it, he's going to be seen as a loser in history. He says essentially, no, I'm going to go stay as long as I possibly can because this is what I want to do. I want to be Speaker of the House. Yes, he is extremely, extremely, extremely ambitious.
And motivated, yeah. But he's given away so much that should he become Speaker, it's kind of a diminished role. And the likelihood he'll be able to stay, having given away, what is it? Any one member.
The motion to vacate the chair.
Vote to vacate. That's going to be a pretty sad and brief time for him, right?
But what's the alternative for him? He kind of goes back and says,
okay.
At least he gets to say he was Speaker of the House. They make an oil point painting for him, even if it's almost just a ceremonial role that he would have, and the power would actually be in some of the committee members. At least he can say, I've been Speaker of the House, and he gets to sit behind the president when the president delivers the State of the Union address.
All right. Very good. Well, thank you very, very much. As always, you have 5 books. One of them is The Great American Political Trivia Challenge. Is that the exact title?
That is the political trivia on steroids.
Okay. Do when we do these, you should have a copy of that, or at least one of your books to hold up. Why don't you? Do you have one?
Yes.
Good. There it is.
Right here.
It's a cool book that's just packed with political trivia. There's no
available on Amazon.com for only $20.
Okay, good. So it's easier for me if you hold it up each time, and so that's cool. I appreciate it. Rich Rubino, thank you so much. You're just such an excellent guest, and we'll do it again soon.
I can't wait. Thank you so much, Bradley. It'll be a very exhausting and interesting week.
Okay. Bye now.